Well, in this video, I want to talk a little bit about the shamanic drumming and how it's really not working for us anymore, and how basically you can make a change to the way you play the shamanic drumming beat that's going to enhance your shamanic journeys 1,000 times, because we're going to take a look at what's going on in your brain and why this has to change. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but I've been exploring how drumming is used to influence brain behavior for about 30 years. Looking at what's happening inside the brain when we play the drums, when we listen to the drums. What does musical rhythm do in our brains that's unique from other forms of music? And why is it so powerful? So in this video, we're going to talk about shamanic drumming and why it doesn't really work anymore the way it used to. Traditional shamanism has been around for tens of thousands of years. It's practiced in nearly every part of the world. There isn't a continent on this planet that hasn't had some shamanic technique that was integral to the health of the community. And all these shamanic techniques are very, very similar. They have three core components. I've talked about these in other videos. Those core components are ceremonial intent, creating a sacred space, basically so your brain can shift. Having focused visualizations, using mental imagery to be able to impact your world. And then percussion to drive the brain through brainwave entrainment, the ability to enter an altered state of consciousness, usually through the drumming, but in some small segments of the population, psychedelic drugs. So I always talk about the drumming because I'm a drummer, but I also think it's more effective. It's more universal. Over 90% of the cultures that have shamanic traditions use the drumming. A small percentage use some sort of drug. So in this video, I'm going to talk a bit about why this drumming rhythm isn't really working the way it used to. And it all comes down to these electronic devices that we carry around. The way we are constantly hitting ourselves with novelty. Constantly seeking that little adrenaline rush that we get from something new coming at us, checking our Facebook feed, waiting for that next email, reading whatever news we want to read in order to get outraged or whatever. Anything at all that gives us this little jolt of novelty. Our brains are novelty-seeking devices. We are always looking for something new and unusual to hook into. And it excites us. It releases nice chemicals in our brains. And that makes it really difficult for the shamanic drum beat to work the way it did even 100 years ago, much less 20,000 years ago. Our nervous systems have changed enough that what will end up happening when we listen to the shamanic beat is that our brains will have deciphered the pattern, have decided that it's not unique or stimulating enough, and we'll start shutting it out. When it can't shut it out, it'll actually get annoyed. We'll start feeling anxiety. We'll start feeling agitation. That is because we have gotten so used to so much input, so much stimulus all the time, that being able to slow down doesn't work the way it used to. So it's not that the drumming can't do this, but it's that our nervous systems have changed. So how do we change the drumming beat? It's really fairly simple. But first I want to talk a little bit about how this whole process works. What is the mechanism involved here that allows a shamanic drumming beat to bring somebody into an altered state of consciousness? Why is it that so many cultures around the world, through their own experimentation, came up with the exact same beat? That beat, by the way, I played it when I started this video. If you're not familiar, that beat goes like this. And it's simply a 4 beat per second repetitive beat. Yes, there's minor variations because of the way that the beater hits the drum and the overtones that happen and the inconsistency of the typical shamanic drummer. But it's a repetitive pulse, and it can go on for 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes or hours, depending on what kind of ritual you're involved in. This process, though, is really fairly simple. It's called brainwave entrainment. And the idea here is that that pulsation, that 4 beats per second of the drumming, will actually get your brain waves to oscillate or pulse at the exact same tempo. And if you look at an EEG device, EEG mapping of somebody's brain when they're listening to this, you'll see that their brain is pulsating at exactly the same tempo as the drumming. This is brainwave entrainment. This tempo is the low end of a state of consciousness called theta. Theta is an inwardly directed state. It's one of 5 levels of consciousness that we go through in our daily lives. The lowest is delta. Delta exists between about just above 0 to around 3 cycles per second, or 3 beats per second. And that's unconsciousness. We are totally unresponsive to our world around us. This is deep sleep or unconsciousness. The next state is theta. Theta exists from about 4 to around 8 beats per second. That is an internally directed state. The lower we are down in theta, the less responsive we are to our outer world. The higher we get up in theta, the more responsive we are to our external senses. The next level of consciousness is alpha. Alpha exists around 8 to 13, 12, 13 cycles per second. This is a relaxed neurological state. We're outwardly directed. In other words, we're responsive to our world around us, but our brains are relaxed. We tend to be just very calm. The next level is beta. Beta is our normal wakeful consciousness. It's about 13 to about 30 cycles per second. And that is our normal wakeful state, which tends to be very chaotic. We'll have little spikes of this beta activity going around in our brains, depending on what kind of stimulus we're receiving. So whatever's coming at us, we're responding to, reacting to neurologically. So if we hear a certain sound, a certain part of our brain lights up. And it's lighting up because of association. We hear a sound, a dog barking, for instance. We recognize it as a dog barking right away because we have experience with a dog barking. It's different than a coyote howling or a person screaming. We are able to distinguish these differences through experience and association. Our brains are basically looking for previous experience with that type of stimulus to be able to categorize it and be able to figure out what to do with it. That's all happening in beta. And so there's this constant reaction to the world around us that's happening. And so it's kind of chaotic. The next level up is 30 hertz up to around 100, 120. That is a gamma activity. That is a higher level of cognitive function. We see this gamma activity actually when we look at the brain with my clinical program, the Rhythmic Entrainment Intervention. When we feed the brain unpredictable, novel stimulus, we can get gamma activity to spike, which is really interesting. If I give the brain something that is variable and somewhat predictable, there will be no gamma activity. There may be entrainment. There may be some beta, definitely alpha, but no gamma. Gamma happens when there's an unpredictable, highly unpredictable, unique nature to something, when the brain has to begin to start discerning what's going on, to decipher patterns. You'll also see that in high-level meditators. You'll see some gamma activity happening as well. You won't see it in shamanic journeying. Shamanic journeying is all about that low end of theta, that inwardly directed state where we're separated from our outer world. We're connected to something else. We're opening our minds up to some other reality. A lot of people would describe it that the further you go down theta, remember that exists from about 8 cycles per second to around 4 cycles per second. The further you get down, the slower you go, the more you're open to mystical experience. People who have been meditating for a very long time can get to that low theta. They don't start there. If you were to begin meditating today and you're a typical meditator, you may get yourself into an alpha state of consciousness, 8 to 10 cycles per second. You may see some synchronization in there, some ability to kind of get into this calm neurological state. The more you meditate, the more you can get down into theta. And then as you get down into theta, you'll see some gamma happening. I have some videos on this, on meditation, what happens in the brain there. But for the purposes of shamanic journeying, what we're going for is we're going for that 4 beats per second to match the tempo of the drumming, to help you open up to mystical experience. And when you're in that theta state, if you're doing a shamanic journey, what you're doing here is you're using a focused visualization, imagery, mental imagery, to be able to impact the world around you. So, traditional shamanic cultures, the shaman will go into this altered state of consciousness with the intent of helping a particular patient. He will be looking at this patient in this altered state, getting a different view of what's going on with this person, and will generally either retrieve someone's energy or eject some foreign energy that's infecting the person. That's how the traditional shamanic journey generally works. It gets more nuanced than that as you get deeper into it, but the shaman will actually be directing his journey in a very focused, intentional way. If you were just starting out in core shamanism and you're kind of experimenting with shamanism, you're going to be taught how to be more of a passenger in the process. You're going to go in and you're going to have an intent, for instance, of connecting with a spirit helper. And you're going to go in and say, I like to connect with the spirit helper. That's your ceremonial intent. And you go in and that imagery unfolds for you, not by you. And so you'll be going along and things will happen and you'll travel a certain way where you have very little control over it. As you do this more and more, you start exerting more control. You start having the ability to direct that inner world the way you want to direct it. So now you can bring in a particular spirit animal. Now you could bring in a very focused intent on retrieving someone's energy, for instance. These types of things. You could look at past trauma, all these things that are part of the traditional shamanic world. For the purpose of this video, we're going to be looking at why the drumming worked in the past and why it may not work so well today. So if you've done any shamanic journeying, you've probably done one of two things. You've either turned on a recording and listened to a drumming passage that has been exactly what I played, steady 4 beats per second pulse, or you've played the drum yourself. Now I'm going to recommend if you're a beginning journeyer, put the drum aside, don't play it yourself, because that's going to get in the way anyway. You have to develop a certain level of skill as a shamanic journeyer to be able to play the drum for yourself and get into the altered state of consciousness, because just the nature of moving your body to play this rhythm is going to keep part of your brain out of the theta state of consciousness. It just does. You're engaging the motor center of your brain. That's going to stay active. It can't go into this entrainment into theta. That doesn't mean you're not getting into a shamanic state of consciousness. It just means it makes it a little bit more difficult. Experienced journeyers will be able to navigate both worlds. They'll have a foot in each world, which can be really powerful. That only happens and is only beneficial when you are to a point where you can direct your consciousness the way you want to direct it. So if you're starting out, don't play the drum. Listen to a drumming recording. And don't listen to one that's just steady drumming. That's where we're running into problems nowadays. Our brains are so used to so much stimulus all the time that we need some novelty. And this is something that is true with brainwave entrainment in general. It used to be, and at least used to be believed, that brainwave entrainment will happen based upon the tempo of the drumming. Tempo of the stimulus. So it's not just drumming, it can be binaural beats as well, because that's another way of engaging brainwave entrainment. I talk about this in other videos. We're going to talk about drumming primarily in this instance. But just to kind of give you a general guideline, and I talk about this in one of my videos about theta tempos. The lower you are in theta, historically, the more regular that pulse can be. So traditionally, a shamanic drumming pulse could be exactly repetitive, no changes at 4 beats per second for as long as you want it to go, and it will still engage the brain into entrainment. If you speed up the rhythm to 5 beats per second, you may have to change the rhythm a little bit, create a little bit of novelty to keep the brain engaged. Because the brain now, you're coming out of this really deep-seated state where you're separate from your outer world. The more out of this inner world that you get, in other words, the faster you go in theta, the more your external sensory system is engaged, the more your brain starts relying on association and deciphering patterns engages. And if it's really repetitive, your brain can decipher that pattern really quickly and determine it's not a threat and push it off to the side. And if it can't tune it out, it gets annoyed. So if I was playing at 6 or 7 or 8 beats per second and I'm playing that same shamanic rhythm, which would sound like this, that's about 6 beats per second. Your brain's going to really quickly figure out that that is a repetitive pulse. And it's going to decide after not too long that it doesn't need to attend to that because there's other things it needs to attend to. Remember, as you get out of this internally directed state and you're more engaged with your surroundings, you're really all about, is there a threat to my world? You know, what's coming at me? What do I need to attend to? And this gets in the way because we can't attend to something that's novel. If this is too much, we've already figured it out. We know what it is. It's not going to change. Now we need to be worried about what that sound is in the background. Was that a car going by? You know, is there something I should be worried about? This is what our nervous system does all day long. And the more we get out of this really deep internally directed state, the only way to keep the brain engaged with this type of stimulus is to change it up enough for the brain to continually go, so what's next? What's next? Is this important? And that'll keep us engaged and allowing brainwave entrainment to happen. So if you look at today's world, since we're so inundated with stimulus, even when we're down into this deepest level of theta, this 4 beats per second, we still need some novelty. We need some variability in order to stay engaged, because even at that point, most of us are so anxious and so used to so much stimulus that we can't fully be at 4 beats per second. We can't fully be down into low theta. We've still got one little bit of awareness in the regular world looking for something novel, looking for something that's going to stimulate us because we're so used to it. So the only way to keep the brain and get the brain down into that really low state nowadays is to vary the rhythm a little bit. And I'm going to do that for you. You can see what this feels like. If you have no experience at all journeying, and this is your first kind of encounter with the shamanic drumming, keep in mind that the brainwave entrainment takes time. It can take 12 to 17 minutes, depending on who you are and your experience, to even entrain the first time. So if you've never had any experience with this type of stimulus before, and you're going to close your eyes and you're going to let this kind of waft over you and hope to get into a deep trance state, you may not. That is totally normal. It's going to take some time for your brain to learn to shift into this. If you've been doing this for a little while and never really felt like you've gotten very deep, chances are as I change the rhythm up, it'll make a huge difference for you. If you're like me, and I have ADHD, you may not have ADHD, but you just may have a really super stimulated brain where the idea of sitting down and meditating is like, no way. You know, you just get too squirrely, too uncomfortable. You're going to find that the repetitive beat is really not going to work. The variable rhythm will work, but again, it may take 12 to 17 minutes the first time. And I'm not going to play for 12 to 17 minutes this time. So come back, watch the video again, mark the point where I start playing, allow yourself to experience it a few times. Your brain will learn how to do this. As you get used to this process, you'll notice that that variable rhythm will take you deeper because your brain will stay engaged for longer. So allow yourself to experience that. You don't have to have any intent this time around. I want you just to see what it feels like in your mind to allow yourself to just have this drumming hit you. Where does your head go? Where does your thought process go between these two rhythms? What does it feel like for you? So I'm going to start out by playing just a straight ahead shamanic beat, 4 beats per second. Like I said, if you have no experience at all with brainwave entrainment, you may not feel much other than just being able to hear the drumming. You could be one of those people that feels it right away, so don't go in with any particular expectations. Just recognize that it may be fairly subtle at first for you. But just notice what's going on in your body, in your mind, in your thought processes when I play this. I'm going to play for about 30 seconds or so with just this repetitive beat, so you can get a sense for what this feels like. And then I'm going to play a variable rhythm, and we're going to see what happens there and see how different it is. So here's a steady pulse. Okay, so this time I'm going to play same tempo. I'm going to do variable rhythms. I'm playing this drum. This is a kunga drum. It's a cross between a djembe and a kunga that I usually play for my videos. I'm going to do some different tones. Basically the same basic tempo, just constantly changing what I'm doing so that you can get a sense for what happens when you can't predict what's going to happen. So, and then in the comments below, tell me which one you prefer. Some people like that straight ahead beat still. They have some experience, they have a brain that's wired to be able to handle that repetitive stimulus very well. And then a lot of us, we need that variability in order to really engage to it. Otherwise, our minds are all over the place and we can't get into it. So tell me what you prefer. I'm going to play this one 4 beats per second.